Yes, could you ask Mr. Lawrence to come back, please? All right, Mr. Lawrence.
Yes, thank you.
Ready to continue? A minute.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Lawrence, just picking up a thread that we let drop before the lunch break. On this project, was there a project lead in the sense of, well, were you the project lead within Rydon?
Well, obviously responsible for the delivery of the contracts. Oh, yes, contracts manager,
Yeah.
but I wasn't site-based. Project lead on site was Simon O'Connor.
Yes, but in your role, are we to understand that you yourself did not have a personal assistant?
Correct.
Right. So you had nobody with experience of administering construction programs, deliverables, RFIs, to act as your second pair of hands?
No, I mean Simon O'Connor would pick up some of that, but no, I didn't have a sort of a PA or a contracts manager's assistant. No.
And was there a work package or WP design lead?
We'd split the team. So Simon O'Connor would be the project manager for the site. So concentrate purely on that project, as in Grenfell. So site based. He would oversee. I mean, a lot of our roles would overlap. But he obviously was only concentrating on Grenfell and no other at the time. And then from that, we would then have our management who would look after. It would either be divided into subcontractors or work areas, or it varied depending on the works.
Right. And who would it be within Rydon who would have, as it were, their finger on the pulse of the work of the subconsultants or subcontractors, probing them, monitoring, supervising them, and making sure that the individual work packages were keeping on track?
It would be a combination of me and Simon.
I see. Okay. Now, can I then turn to the next topic, which is RS 5000 information? Can I ask you to look at the RS 5000 data sheet, first of all? This is RYD 3039507. And this is the RS 5000 issue 1 data sheet, as you can see from the top right-hand corner. Thank you. First of all, issue 1, August 2014. Can you see that?
Yes.
Do you remember reading that document at any stage?
I had seen it, but I think like the BBA certification we were talking about earlier, it's not something that I would have pulled apart on every single word. But yes, I had seen it, and I think there might have even been a sales brochure promoting the use for suitable for range screen over 18 metres.
Now let's look at page 1 of the document. We can see that it says, with Celotex RS 5000, you are specifying an insulation board that, first bullet, features a super low lambda value of 0.021, offering enhanced thermal performance, is the first PIR insulation board to successfully test a BS 8414, meet the criteria set out in BR 135, and therefore is acceptable for use in buildings above 18 metres in height. Has Class 0 fire performance throughout the entire product in accordance with BS 476. When you read this document, did you read those statements in there?
I probably would have focused on the introduction part of it more than anything. So I was going to say cursory look, but that sounds
right
inappropriate knowing what's happened. But yes, it would have been a high level look at the document.
Let's just pin you down a bit more on what you mean by introductory part or introduction part. Did you notice what was said in the big red banner at the top?
I'm sure I would have done.
including
Because of the-
suitable for buildings
because of
above
the-
18 metres in
Yes,
height.
yeah. How much further I got past that, and probably the first paragraph.
Right. And you'll see in the first paragraph, the last sentence concludes, and therefore is acceptable for use in buildings above 18 metres in height. Did you focus on that? Did you notice it?
I would have noticed that part of it, yes.
Right. Okay. Do I take it from that that you didn't notice or didn't pay as much attention as to the three technical bullet points I've set out below? Or I've read out to you as set out below.
No, probably not. No.
Let's look at page 3 of the document, because we find here further information about the certification. It says certification, and then there's some details set out there. Did you look at that, do you remember?
I don't remember looking at that.
Right. Did you, and let's look at this, look at the last few lines in there, just to see if this triggers some kind of recollection. The fire performance and classification report issued only relates to the components detailed above. Any changes to the components listed will need to be considered by the building designer. Do you think you read that statement?
I wouldn't have noticed it, no.
You wouldn't have
I've-
noticed it. Right.
Obviously, since and preparing for it, yes, I have.
Yes.
This has obviously been flagged up at the time, no.
But as a reasonably competent contracts manager on a project like this, would it have been normal for you to have read that in full and understood it?
No, I don't think it would have been normal, no, because there's technical information in there that I couldn't interpret. Couldn't interpret.
Right.
Again, it would be more of a. Is there some sort of certification? You know, is it I was going to say a suitable product without going into the in-depth technical side of it.
Right. To your knowledge, did the designer of the cladding system for Grenfell Tower, whoever that was, ever actually consider the actual components of the cladding system to see whether they were comparable to the system tested by Celotex for the purposes of 8414?
The answer is I don't know. I would have assumed that Harley's would have the knowledge of Celotex and
Right.
the other designers.
To the extent that the actual components of the cladding system as applied to Grenfell Tower were different from the cladding system as tested for the purposes of BS 8414, would you accept that no reliance should have been placed by you or anybody else involved in this project on this certification?
In hindsight, and now knowing this, then yes, I accept that.
Yeah. Do you recall either you or anybody else at Rydon talking directly to Celotex about the suitability of this product, FR 5000 and then RS 5000, as insulation at Grenfell?
Don't recall anything, no.
Now, let's just look at the system specification involving this for the moment. Can I ask you to look at an email, RYD 50421, please? This is an email from you to Mr. Brissenden of the 22nd of April 2015. This is when you sent it to him, and we can look at the email, but this is the system specification. First of all, does this document look familiar to you, sitting here now?
The document does, yes.
Yes. When do you think you saw it? Well, I've given you a date of April 2015, but...
Yeah, I'll have to take your word for that, I don't know.
All right, well, then maybe that doesn't matter. You confirm that you saw it at the time. Can I ask you to look at the system as shown on the left-hand side in the second line there? That it says... it says system, metal technology, high thermally broken aluminium windows, and then Rain-O-Bond composite rain screen cassettes. Do you remember where you got this document from?
Well, it would have come from Harley's, so
Right. Well, I'll take you back to the email just to see if I can just pin this down in time. It is RYD 3039517, please. Here's the email you sent to Mr. Brissenden on that date. And you sent the RS5000 product data sheet and the general system spec notes. And we've checked those out, and the specification is indeed the one that you say you got from Harley's. You don't need to understand anything in the text of the email, but it gives you a date as to when at least you had seen it. Do you remember the circumstances in which you got the system specification document from Harley?
In which I got it. I mean, the conversation with David Brissenden is all reliant on the eco funding, as we were talking about prior to the break. But whether we had that product, whether we had that document on file from Harley's, whether that was the latest revision we had on file, or whether I specifically asked them for it and they sent it to me, I couldn't be sure.
All right. Can we just go back to it, please? RYD 50421. Just have a look at the specification. Did you, when you saw it, notice that the specification notes didn't specify any insulation?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I don't recall.
Right. You don't recall. I mean, sitting here now, it's clear that the specification notes don't specify insulation. Yep. Give you any reason or explanation as to why that is?
No.
Do I take it that you didn't pursue that issue with Harley?
No, I don't recall not noticing it.
Did Mr. Brissenden not ask you about it when you sent him the RS5000 data sheet and the specification notes, which doesn't refer to it?
I don't recall him asking, but he may have done. I don't
Does it follow from that you didn't put the two documents you were sending Mr. Brissenden together, the specification sheet and the specification notes, and notice that...
Compare the two?
Compare the two.
No, I'd probably not, no.
No. If you go next, please, to RYD 3039499. This is an email the same day. It's 22nd of April 2015. To you from Mr. O'Connor, where he says, Psi, the insulation type is as follows: Celotex RS 5080, aluminium foil facing, class BS 476, BS 8414, and then PU EN 9165 2012, warehouse Celotex, Ipswich. Do you know why he sent that to you?
No.
Did you ask for it, you think?
I don't even recall this email at all.
Right.
So,
what was when you saw it? What did you think he meant by class BS 476?
Well, like I say, I don't recall this email and quite what it was asked for, but I think if I was to read it again without hindsight, I think I would just be focusing on the Celotex RS part of it.
Right.
And the sort of model number.
I mean, on the face of it, it looks as if Simon O'Connor is assuming that you would understand that BS 476 and BS 8414 would mean something to you.
I think he's copied and pasted that off something, I would suggest. It doesn't mean anything to me. I can't tell you what that British Standard classification is.
Right. Did you know the difference between RS 5000 and RS 5080?
I think that might have been the thickness. I think the 80 might have been the thickness.
Yeah, did you know that at the time? Did you understand that?
I can't recall if I knew that at the time or have known that since, maybe.
Did it occur to you to think about whether the test denoted by those numbers, particularly BS 8414 identified there, had been carried out on the same system that you were proposing for Grenfell Tower?
No.
Is there any reason why not?
Well, I don't know the context in what the email was sent or why. he's either forwarded it to me, excuse me, or I've asked for it. But I would imagine we would focus, or I would have focused on the seller text and the model number.
I want to turn to ask you some questions about Kingspan's Cooltherm K15. Now, you've heard of that product, I take it?
I've heard of the products, yes.
Yes. As contracts manager, were you aware of what materials were being ordered onto the site and stored on site at any given time?
Was I aware of them? I didn't go and check them. I didn't go and look at them. I didn't do the quality control part of the installation. So, would I have walked past a bundle of insulation? Possibly, I don't know. But I didn't know that Kingspan was on there, no.
Were you on top of what orders were coming in, even just from a documentary review remote from site?
No, because the materials predominantly are ordered by the subcontractor, and they control their materials, the amount they need, when they need them, etc., etc. So we wouldn't have a system where we booked in their materials and checked off how much was on site and how much wasn't on site.
Right, so if, for example, Harley had ordered onto site a quantity of, for example, Kingspan Cooltherm K15 on a date, you wouldn't know whether it...
Yeah, it'd be very unlikely that I knew, yeah.
Right.
It'd be unlikely that I knew.
And who at Rydon would have their fingers on that information?
It would be one of the site team.
One of the sites.
So either Simon O'Connor or whoever's dealing with that element at that time.
Okay. Does that tell us that at any given time you personally, at least, weren't aware of what quantities of what insulation was stored on site?
Yeah, correct. I couldn't tell you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you know what the usual lead time for ordering insulation on this project was?
No idea.
Right. Can I then go back to a different topic, which is your contractual relationship with Harley? We've discussed already your role in involving managing contractual relations. We looked at paragraph 45 of your statement. I just want to pursue that a bit more. And I think you've already agreed, just to set it in context, that it was your responsibility to know what responsibilities other parties owed to Rydon under their contracts. Yes. And vice versa, to ensure that Rydon and those other parties complied with their contractual obligations.
Yes.
Yes. Now, can we look then, please, at the letter of intent that you sent to Harley Curtain Wall Limited at HAR 50120? And if we can turn to page 4 of that, we can see a signature there.
Yes.
That's your signature, I'm
Correct.
assuming. And if we go to page 2 of this letter, and I should just, before I do, show you page 1. It is not itself dated, but I think, can sort that out as we go through your evidence. But it's a letter of intent, Grenfell Tower, the site, and it says, "We confirm that it is our intention to appoint you under our standard subcontract order as the envelope package subcontractor in relation to the external facade works at the above site." And then you can see compliance. The authorised works must comply with the following, and you can see A and B, and then C, specification, page numbers, as per Schedule of Information Appendix F, drawing numbers, as per Schedule of Information Appendix F. And there are other things in there as well, which have to be complied with. Can I then take you to page 2 of that under the rubric contract? We confirm, it says there, that it is Kensington and Chelsea Tenant Management Organisation Limited's, the employer, intention to appoint Rydon as the contractor to undertake the works in accordance with the JCT standard form. And then B, the articles of agreement and subcontract conditions of DOM 2 will apply, save where they are modified by the terms of this contract. The draft building contract is available for inspection by you at our offices. You are deemed to have notice of all of its provisions, and its provisions are incorporated in this contract insofar as they relate to the authorised works. Are you familiar, or were you familiar at the time, with the DOM 2 subcontract conditions?
The general principle, yes. I couldn't couldn't state you all the different conditions in it, but yes.
Right. Well, let's just pull them up. They're at INQ 30111211. That's page 1, and that's the 2011 edition, which was current at 2013-14. Just looking at this first page, does this trigger a recollection? Are you familiar with this?
It's a contract that we, in general principle, and we refer to as and when we need to.
Right. Given that you're a design and build, or I think Rydon was a design and build business relying on subcontractors, was this standard form, DOM2 a 2011 edition, a contract you commonly used as a standard form when engaging subcontractors?
It probably was at the time, if we're in a JCT contract as well.
Yes. Now, let's look at page 2, please. If you look at the right-hand page 2 and the last paragraph, it says, these conditions constitute a subcontract only where the domestic subcontract DOM2 Articles of Agreement and the associated appendix have been completed. In fact, can you confirm this? The domestic subcontract DOM2 Articles of Agreement and associated appendix were never completed when subcontracting in Harley, were they?
I don't recall.
You don't recall? Is it that you don't recall one way or the other, or
I don't recall one way or the other.
Right.
The orders and contracts such as this are put together by the commercial department, and then obviously my signature goes on the bottom of them.
right? Well, when you did sign the bottom of the letter of intent, referring to the subcontract conditions of DOM2 applying, did you, on behalf of Rydon, intend that these terms would apply?
Yes, I'm sure we did.
Let's look at page 8 and condition 2.4.1, top left. Materials, goods and workmanship. All materials and goods for the subcontract, other than the part thereof comprised in the subcontractor's designated works, shall, so far as procurable, be of the kinds and standards described in the subcontract documents. All materials and goods for the subcontractor's design works shall, so far as procurable, be of the kinds and standards described in the contractor's requirements, or if not there specifically described, the subcontractor's proposals or documents referred to in clause 2.6, provided that the subcontractor shall not substitute anything without the contractor's written consent, but no such consent shall relieve the subcontractor of his obligations under this subcontract. I've read that at length. There's quite a lot of legal verbiage there, but I just want to see how that matches up. When you go back to the letter of intent, please, at HAR 50120, you can see that it says at page 1 that the authorised works must comply with the following. C, and I read this to you earlier, specification pages as per Schedule of Information Appendix F. And I showed you before the provision that says that you're deemed to have all notice of all the building contracts provisions. Now, the Schedule of Information Appendix F, let's look at that. That's at HAR 50396. If we could just have that up. HAR 50396. Here is Appendix F. And this comes from you, Mr. Lawrence. Can I take it that you are familiar with this schedule and its contents?
Yes, this is a Rydon appendix.
It is, and this is part of the information which you were telling Harley in your contract with Harley that needed to be.
Yes, and this is put together by our commercial department, but yes.
Indeed, but you signed it.
Yes.
Yes. And you can see the third entry down under specifications. You see it says Section B, specification and design requirements. So that's incorporated. Yes? Yes. So you nodded.
Yes,
but-
sorry, yes.
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 Was it your understanding that this was a reference to the section of the building contract between the TMO and Rydon entitled Section B, specification and design requirements?
Yes, I would expect it to be back to back with our contract.
Thank you. Let's turn to that then. That's TMO 100411791. Page 2. Under contents, we can see part 2, if we look at that, Section B, specification and design requirements. So that's where the reference feeds through. If you look at page 179, please, within Section 2B, we can here see that it provides, as you can see from the top of the page, architectural employer requirements are contained within, and then you can see architectural, NBS in Appendix A, architectural, and room data sheets in Appendix A, room data sheets. Seeing it then in both contracts, and I've shown you both sides of your contracts, contract in and contract out, was it your understanding that Harley was required by the letter of intent to construct the authorised works in accordance with the NBS specification?
Yes.
As we've already seen, the NBS specification specifies at H92, para 776, that the thermal insulation must be Celotex FR5000. We've seen that this morning.
Yes.
So would it follow, and do you accept, that if Harley were to substitute a different insulation product for FR5000, then they would need Rydon's written consent?
Yes.
And within Rydon, that would be you, wouldn't it, who would have responsibility as contracts manager for providing that written consent?
Probably ultimately, but it'd probably go to the site team. It would then go and be checked by the architectural team. So we wouldn't. Had I known it was changed, and I'm not sure when it was changed, and I know there is some discussion, and I know this from the documents, that it may have changed post my leaving the project, but I wasn't aware that it changed prior to that.
Well, we're just going to come to that, but thank you.
Sorry.
No, it's good. That is where we're going. Now, we know that Celotex FR5000 insulation was specified on Grenfell Tower at H92776, and we've seen that. And we also know that Celotex RS5000 was installed as insulation. Now, did you know that on the 26th of May 2015, and the precise date doesn't matter, 96 sheets of K15, Kingspan K15, were ordered by Harley from SIG, the supplier, for delivery on the 4th of June 2015?
No.
You didn't? Did you know that in
unless they're in somewhere else in the spec and they were for the lower floors, but no, I didn't know they were. Sorry, the answer to the question is no, I didn't know they were ordered.
Thank you. On the 10th of September 2015, and again the precise date doesn't matter, but because you were still there for another month and a half or so before you left.
Yep.
Did you know that at that time 49 units of Kingspan Cooltherm K15 were ordered by Harley from CCF this time?
No.
No.
I was aware, just to fill that story out slightly more, became aware at the end, prior to me leaving, that Harley were in had financial difficulties, were in the process of changing companies. I was aware of that, and I made that aware as soon as I found out. I made that aware to Steve, but Steve had already knew that ahead of me. So.
Were you aware of any discussions, either on site or between people on site and the architectural team, as you call them, about the substitution of RS5000 with Cooltherm K15?
No, I didn't know K15 was involved at all until the evidence has come up.
Can you explain why that is?
Why I didn't know?
Well, first of all, can you explain? Yes. Why can you explain why you didn't know?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily see all the materials on site anyway, unless I particularly walk around and were looking for them, which wouldn't necessarily be the case. At that stage, in come September, I think I can't remember the precise date that I left. It was October sometime, but there was an overlap between me, Steve, Dave Hughes, and me leaving and them coming in. So, I wouldn't have. I didn't know that there was a Kingspan on site.
No, but your not knowing would be a lapse, wouldn't it, in the contractual arrangements?
Somebody from Rydon, yes, but there was an overlap.
When I say your contractual, and I say the contractual arrangements, I mean Rydon's contractual arrangements, both up and down.
Yes, we should. If they've substituted material, then yes, we should know.
Yes. And to your knowledge, did Harley ever seek permission, either in writing or otherwise, to substitute FR 5000 for Kingspan K15?
Not related to me. I didn't know that.
If they had asked anybody, who would it have been, to the best of your knowledge?
Well, it probably would have either been. Well, Simon O'Connor probably was left as well by then. It probably would have come to me, or at that time it would have gone to Steve, Dave Hughes maybe.
Yeah. Right. Have you any explanation as to how that product came to be on this building?
I think I might have an insight now from since the disaster and since the evidence has come up, and I think it's relating to their credit limit, and Harley's ceasing to trade one company and starting with another, but it was not something I knew at the time.
Right, thank you. Now, can I just ask you to look at Mr. Hughes's witness statement? He's going to be coming to give evidence, but I'll just show you a passage in his statement. This is RYD 30094213. And I'd like you to look at page 10, please, paragraph 55. Now, I should just preface my questions by making it clear to you that this is after your time at Rydon, Mr. Lawrence. But at page 10, paragraph 55, he says, in December 2015 or January 2016, I discussed with Ben Bailey and agreed the use of Kingspan, as Harley's had difficulty obtaining Celotex from their supplier. As far as I was concerned, Kingspan and Celotex are similar products with similar insulation properties. As far as Ben and I were concerned, it was a like-for-like swap of insulating material. I told Steve Blake and the Clerk of Works, John White, of this use of Kingspan insulation material. Now, we know from the records, as we've been through already, that K15 was used during the period you were contracts manager, so an earlier period than the period Mr. Hughes is talking about here. Did you have any views at the time about whether K15 was a like-for-like swap with RS 5000 or FR 5000 for that?
I didn't know it was on site, and I didn't have any views about it. No.
Did you know that Kingspan is a polyurethane rigid foam, whereas Celotex RS 5000 is a polyisocyanurate or PI?
I wouldn't have known that technical difference, no. They look very, if you were to see them side by side, visually they would look similar.
Right. I'm going to ask you now about the LABC certificate relating to these products. Did you, let's have a look at it. KIN 3016733, please. This is the LABC certificate for Kingspan K15 rain screen board. This is issued, or was issued on the 30th of March 2015 for this product. And we see that at the bottom of page 1. First issued on the 28th of August 2013. Do you remember seeing this document at the time of your involvement on the Grenfell Tower project? No.
I've not seen it since.
Right. Now, we know this product wasn't part of the NBS specification, and we know that you, as contracts manager, had not seen any certificate in relation to it. Can you explain how an insulation product is going onto this building in circumstances where it wasn't specified and you didn't know about it, or you hadn't seen a certificate for it?
sorry, can I explain how it was happening? Well, I wasn't overseeing, as in I wasn't on, whilst I might have been on site in the office working, I wasn't standing there managing the package works. That would be one of our site managers. So I wouldn't necessarily see the product either be delivered or actually be installed.
Is now the first time you've ever seen this certificate?
I believe so, yeah. I
see.
don't recall seeing it before.
Because you said you hadn't seen it since. Am I assuming from that you didn't see it at the time or since till
No,
now?
I don't think I've seen it since either, no.
I see. Let me just try a couple of things out on you. I know you, on the caveat that I understand you hadn't seen this document before. Can I ask you to look at page 2, conditions of certificate? A third of the way down they start, and 2/3 of the way down we can see in bold it says from BBA 084582 tested to BS 8414, and then there's a long description of the system test and its component elements. Those were different, those component elements, from the components of the system going on to Grenfell Tower. It's self-evident that that's the case, but can you confirm that?
Yes.
And does it follow from your not ever having seen this, and I suppose it would have to, that you never investigated yourself whether the K15 insulation product had been tested to BR135 in accordance with the criteria in BS 8414?
Yeah, correct.
If we look at page 4, under ADB, it says, just about a third of the way down the page, fire safety, thermosetting insulants, rigid polyurethane foam boards do not meet the limited combustibility requirements of ADB2, table A7, and so should not be accepted as meeting ADB2, paragraph 12.7. However, if they're included as part of a cladding system tested to BR135 and BS 8414 for use above 18 metres, the complete assembly may ultimately prove to be acceptable. Do you accept that the Kingspan Cooltherm K15 doesn't meet the limited combustibility requirements of ADB2?
I'll have to for the document, yes.
And therefore, the linear route to compliance, as I think you described it on Thursday, could not have been met by using this material.
Agreed.
And I think it follows from all of your answers so far on this material that you yourself never conducted any investigations to satisfy yourself that this insulation was compliant with the building regulations
No, correct.
in the context of this project.
Yes.
Now, can I take you back to paragraph 51 of your witness statement? You say there, and this is back to the obviously wrong, in the fifth line from the end, you say, although I have no expertise or qualifications as a designer, my experience as a construction manager meant that if I saw something that was obviously wrong, then I would challenge that, and I would have expected the rest of the Rydon team, and indeed all of those involved in managing the project, to do the same. This is a hypothetical question, but I feel I need to ask it. But had you seen the LABC certificate at the time, would that have jumped out at you as being a product which was obviously wrong for this project?
Can I see the front page of that LABC
You may.
as well, please?
Yep, it's
Sorry.
back. No, indeed, it's back at KIN 16733.
I think pretty much the same as the Celotex. It's fairly misleading unless you read and fully understand all parts of that certificate. I think that's slightly misleading that it gives the impression in the first description of product that it is for use in buildings above 18 metres. But I would expect that if the product was substituted, that it would be checked by the correct design team members and building control.
Now, we've already discussed Rydon's obligation to obtain approval before substituting alternatives to specified products. And we've discussed that the specified product was FR5000, which became RS5000 in August 2014. Who did you understand you had to get approval from, you personally, within Rydon, before ordering or allowing the installation of Kingspan K15 onto this building?
Before ordering?
Yes, before allowing it onto the building.
Well, I would go through. Had I known, and had it been, yeah, I would have spoken to the architect. I would have got that all checked that it was compliant before proposing it to the client, or advising the client that that's what we're intending to use.
Yes. Are you aware, from your recollection, of any discussions at all that you had with the architects or Harley or anybody about the suitability of this product?
No, because I didn't know it was.
No. Now, I want to turn to a different subject, which is Lacknell House. You mentioned it briefly, as we discussed it very briefly, at the beginning of your evidence on Thursday. Can I ask you to look first, please, at ART 403042. And this is an email from Claire Williams to Philip Booth and Nick Valente on the 12th of November 2014. And you're not copied in on this, but I'm reading it to you by way of a background, Mr. Lawrence. And she says, chaps, windows, when I delivered the building contract to site yesterday, I met up with Rydon and Matt Smith yesterday, had a window discussion. I'm looking to take this report to Peter Madison and David Gibson, but I'm waiting for Rydon to verify that the proposed windows will meet building regulations. Cladding. I've just been looking at the cladding as our database is asking for costs. I've put something together. However, I do not know if there is any issue of flame retardance requirement. I know at Lacknell House, one issue was that the replacement panelling for the asbestos cladding was not flame retardant. I don't know if this is in the specification, but want to make sure it is raised. Please advise. Now, first of all, were you at the meeting that she refers to here?
Regarding the windows?
Well, when she delivered the building contract to site, she met up with Rydon. Were you one of those people? I don't know if it was
myself or whether it was. I don't know if I was on site that day or whether it was Simon O'Connor.
Right. You don't recall independently sitting here whether or not you were one of those people who met Claire Williams at that stage?
No, because obviously it was, Claire coming to site was a regular occurrence, so no.
I see. Okay. Did you have an understanding that TMO was relying on Rydon to verify that the proposed windows would meet building regulations?
Yes, that's in relation to changing the size of the windows, and I think we're in the process of checking as to whether it was a feasible change.
Right. Did Rydon provide the verification that Ms. Williams sought? Do you know?
I believe we did, but
right.
I couldn't point you to a document.
Right. Okay. Did you understand at the time, never mind whether it's windows or anything else, that the TMO was relying on Rydon to verify compliance with the building regulations?
Yes.
And she goes on to say, under the cladding paragraph, and I've shown you that, was the issue of fire performance of the cladding ever raised with you, yourself personally, either by Artelia or by the TMO?
I believe it was raised by Claire, but it was very specific to the element that it was raised against.
Yes. Well, let's look at that. RYD 000023468. This is an email from Claire Williams to you the same day, 12th of November 2014. Copy to Philip Booth at Artelia, Grenfell Cladding. Simon, I'm just writing to get clarification on the fire retardance of the new cladding. I just had a Lacknell moment. And then she sets out what looks like a cut and paste or an extract from the NBS specification where it refers to compliance standard, the Centre for Windows and Cladding Technology, standard for systemized building envelopes, etc. And there's the rest of it there. When you received that email, what did you understand Claire Williams to mean by a Lacknell moment?
Well, I knew that, I think we referenced this the other day, I knew that I'd heard that there was a fire at Lacknell some years before, but I didn't know the specific details. So I knew it was relating to fire.
Right. And you knew it was relating to fire. Did you also know that it was relating to fire in the context of the fire retardance of the new cladding?
No.
She says that, though. I'm writing to get clarification on the fire retardance of the new cladding. I just had a Lacknell moment. So putting the question slightly differently.
Yes.
What connection did you make between the fire, if any, between the fire retardance of the new cladding and Lacknell House?
Only the fact that Lacknell House had had a fire. No more connection than that.
Right.
But this email to me is relating specifically to the GRC cladding at the bottom section of the tower. And not cladding overall, because there'd also been a conversation. There had been conversations around Claire and the TMO's concern about the robustness of the cladding on the lower floors of the building, and the concern from external fire, i.e. bins and etc. etc.
How do you... Sorry,
go on, Karen.
No, you finished your answer.
Yes.
How do you get that from the email? How do you get from the email that her concern arising from her Lacknell moment related only to the fire retardance of the cladding on the lower parts of the building?
Because it says GRC products. The bit where it's copied and pasted, it says compliance and recommendations of GRCA publications, and then it references the GRC products. Well, the GRC products were only used on the bottom, 3 metres, 6 metres of the building, around the columns at the bottom. And there was also another conversation, and I can't tell you the timescale, but there was another conversation involving Claire and others around the robustness of the lower sections of cladding external treatment around the entrance of Grenfell. And the concern, she'd expressed concern, and I think this might only be verbally, I'm not sure if there's any email trail on this, about, because they stored bins and etc. Around the lower floors, and they were concerned about if anything happened there, whether that would cause an issue from the lower floors.
Right. I don't think there's any reference in your witness statement to the context of this email being a discussion about cladding on the lower 4 floors only.
I don't know if it mentions it in the...
All right. Well...
it specifically says in there, I'll read, and having reviewed this since, it specifically says GRC products.
Yes. It also says compliance standard, the Centre for Window and Cladding Technology, CWCT, standard for systemized building envelopes. What did you get out of that reference in the context of her Lacknell moment?
I got out that it was relating to the GRC products, and I'd like to say I believe that, well, I know that there was a conversation at the time, because we were looking, there was a design conversation going on in the background about whether GRC products could be substituted for Renabond or another, and there was a long conversation about whether stainless steel was acceptable, whether Relabond was acceptable, whether they had to stick with GRC products.
Right.
So I read that as GRC products only. Maybe wrongly, but that's how I read it and read it now.
We have no record of any response by you to her question or request for clarification, if I can put it that way. Is that right? Did you respond?
We can't find any record of it. So
No. Why, on the basis that there isn't any record of a response by you, why is there no record of any response by you to her Lacknell moment question?
I don't know. I would have assumed that I would have taken that email because I wouldn't have answered it directly, and I would have passed that to probably Harley's. So whether there is other emails around the date or not connected, I don't know.
Well,
normally I would have expected to just take that email and I would forward that straight to Harley's, and I would keep Claire copied in. So if there was any backwards and forwards correspondence, then it would be.
Presumably you've had quite a long time before today to think about this email.
Yes, I've seen it previously.
Yes. And you've had quite a long time to examine the documents in the inquiry to see whether there are, in fact, any records of you responding to her or you sending it on to Harley.
Correct.
Casting your mind back, do you remember looking at the compliance standard, CWCT, standardised for systemised building envelopes, at least to give her an initial answer to her request for clarification?
No, I would have taken that email because it's not one that I could answer from a technical point of view. I would take that email and I would pass it on to. I think I would have passed it on to Harley's.
You think sitting here now you would have done?
If that come to me now, then I would take that and I would pass that straight to Harley's, and I would keep Claire and Philip copied in. Claire particularly copied in, so they could respond accordingly to her because I couldn't provide a response to that.
I understand that. So you say you would have sent it to Harley. We find no record of you passing it on to Harley to saying, please help me advise my client. Can you explain that?
No.
Right. You had seen the BBA certificate back in April when Mark Harris sent it to you, 23rd of April 2014, Mr. Lawrence. Can you explain why you didn't at least tell her that Rainabond FR panels, fire-resistant panels, were also available?
I think I've answered this previously. I didn't know they were available.
No, all right. Now, if we look at Mr. Cash's witness statement, he's from Artelia. I just want to look at one thing in it. ART 406544, page 58, please. Paragraph 186. He says, and it's quite a long paragraph, but this is the background to it. 4 lines down, he says, on the question of cladding, or on cladding, Philip, that's Phil Booth, said that he had a quick review of the specification in the tender documents for cladding and quoted various compliance standards for cladding, saying he anticipated one of those standards would require flame retardance. He said that as the client, Claire Williams should seek clarification on her question from Rydon. This was the right approach. It was for Rydon as the contractor to address Claire Williams' questions. First of all, do you agree that it was Rydon's role to address Claire Williams' questions?
The email was directed at us, so yes.
Yeah. And your job within Rydon to address those questions on Rydon's behalf?
Correct.
Yes. There's no reference in Mr. Cash's statement to the request for clarification being limited only to the lower 4 floors. We can see that. Are you quite sure that this discussion, this request for clarification, really was limited to the lower 4 floors?
But the email directs me to GRC cladding, and GRC cladding was only on the lower. It probably wasn't even the lower 4 floors. It's probably the lower floor around the columns.
Well, we may need to revisit that.
I'd have to look at the drawings to find how many floors it the GRC cladding covered, but it was definitely the lower 3 metres, 4 metres, 5 metres.
Right. And you're definite about that, are you?
Without looking at the drawings, I can't tell you how many metres, but I definitely know that the specification was relating to the
Right.
bottom section of the cladding, yes. Bottom section of the envelope, yeah.
Can I ask you then just to look at the NBS specification at H92, which is at CLG. No, it's not. I just want to show it to you. If someone could provide me with the reference for that. It's SEA 50169. And I'd like you to go, please, to page 69. I just want to pick up and follow that answer through. This is where we see the CWCC standard for systemized building envelopes, and this is in the context of H92 rain screen cladding. And under 342, contractor's design of rain screen generally. And we can see there the design standard to CWCT standard for systemized building envelopes. There's nothing in there about the lower 4 floors only.
So can we pull up the part of the specification that relates to GRC cladding?
Well, we can perhaps after a break when I put my fingers on it. So perhaps we can leave that there. Let me go back into the line of the evidence I did want to show you. It's TMO 50887 at page 18, please, which is the witness statement of David Gibson of the TMO. I'd like to look at paragraph 95. And he says there, I recall, however, at one of our monthly design development meetings, Simon Lawrence of Rydon indicating that there was disparity between the delivery times for insulation and rain screen, and to avoid delaying the project, he indicated their intention to install the insulation first and fit the rain screen later. And then at paragraph 96, he goes on. This was the first I was aware that the two items were separate, and it raised some concerns in my mind, having then recently read recommendations following the Lacknell House fire inquest, where I understood that a gap between the insulation and the rain screen had created a chimney flue effect which contributed to the fire spread. You see that? And then he goes on. I'd understood in the next paragraph that sample cladding to have rain screen flush with the insulation, as it came as a surprise to me to learn that they were fitted separately. And then if you go to paragraph 98 at the bottom of the page, I raised this with Simon Lawrence as a matter of serious concern. I'm sorry, it's at the bottom of the previous page, paragraph 98. I raised this with Simon Lawrence as a matter of serious concern and asked him if he could give some assurance that we would not have a Lacknell-type problem with the separation of rain screen and insulation. Do you recall Mr. Gibson raising this matter with you at a meeting?
Not at all, no.
Right.
Rain screen, by the nature of rain screen, there is a gap between rain screen and the insulation, so no, I don't recall this at all.
Right. And over the top of page 99, Mr. Gibson says, the meeting was chaired by Philip Booth of Artelia, and Simon Lawrence assured us that this would create no problem because the materials used were completely inert and would not burn at all. The meeting accepted his assurances in this regard, and nothing came to my notice subsequently prior to the fire to question that these assurances were not accurate. Did you give such an assurance to Mr. Gibson?
No, I don't agree with that statement at all.
Do you recall seeing the minutes which match this description?
No.
Because he refers to those in paragraph 100. He says the minutes of this meeting were produced by Artelia, and they definitely existed because I can recall reading them. I recall that Lacknell had been spelt incorrectly in the minutes. I understand these minutes cannot be located in the TMO files. And I think you're saying you're clear in your mind. You've never seen such minutes.
No.
Right. At paragraph 101, Mr. Gibson says, I have a clear recollection of the discussion and of the minute recording it. And he explains why. And then he goes on to say, in the middle of that paragraph, until the occurrence of the fire at Grenfell Tower, I had always believed the cladding installed was inert, as had been assured by Simon Lawrence, and I had no reason to consider otherwise. I cannot recall the date of the meeting, but I have given some details in my statement as to when it was. I think it may have been about March or April 2015, or possibly earlier. Now that's his witness statement. Can you comment on that?
I don't agree with it at all.
Right. So you say Mr. Gibson is wrong?
Yes.
Right. Now, leaving aside Mr. Gibson's recollection, did you ever yourself personally assure him that the cladding at Grenfell was, to use his word, inert?
No. I wouldn't give technical assurances unless I had that information from the designers or specialists.
No. And what questions did you ever ask Studio E? Or let me put it a slightly different way. Do you have a recollection of ever asking the question of Studio E about the inertness or ertness of these products?
No.
What about Exova?
No.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to turn to the question of cavity barriers next,
Well, that's
which may be a
probably
convenient
a
moment
break.
for a break. There is, as you'll probably have told, there's a reference. I just want to check if I'm unable to do stranded here, as it
Well,
were.
I'll give you a
Standing
couple
here.
of minutes to do that.
Right.
We'll have a break now, Mr. Lawrence. We'll come back at 3:20, and you go to the usher. No talking about your evidence. All right, thank you very much. All right, 3:20. Yes, would you ask Mr. Lawrence to come back, please? All right, ready to go on, Mr. Lawrence? Yes, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lawrence, thank you. Can I ask you, I'm going to go back to the Lacknell moment email, if I may, and I want to look at that side by side with the NBS specification, which is an exercise I was vainly attempting to do before, on my feet before the break, and I'm glad I didn't. If you go to RYD 3023468, this is the email, and I wonder whether we can have that on the left-hand side of the screen. So we can see it. And on the right-hand side, can we please have SEA 50169 at page 55? And what I want to do, Mr. Lawrence, is just to explore with you really where we see these references in Claire Williams's email in the NBS specification. Do you see? It's a slightly involved comparison exercise. Page 55 is what we see on the right-hand side, which is part of the NBS spec H40, entitled Glass Fibre Reinforced Concrete Cladding Stroke Components. Now, just working our way through to the next page of that, H40, Glass Fibre Reinforced Concrete Cladding Components. 130, we can see types of cladding components, proprietary GRC components, column cladding, and then you can see the GRC components are set out there. And GRC stands for glass reinforced concrete.
Correct.
Right. And if you go over the page, please, to page 57 and look at general requirements preparatory work, paragraph 205, contractor's design of cladding to columns. In the last bullet point there, you see additional requirements comply with the recommendations of GRCA publications, specification for the manufacture, curing and testing of GRC products, and guide to fixings for glass fibre reinforced concrete cladding. Now, just looking at that and then casting your eye to the left of the screen, you can see that the words in Claire Williams's email comply with the recommendations of GRCA publications, specification for the manufacture, curing and testing of GRC products, and guide to fixings for glass fibre reinforced concrete cladding come straight out of this part of the NBS specification.
Correct.
I mean, now you've put two side by side, you can see where her reference to the GRCA publications comes from. Now, we have looked through H40 and cannot find any reference in that section of the NBS specification to the compliance standard Centre for Window and Cladding Technology, CWCT, standard for systemized building envelopes. That comes from H92, on page 69. I'll just pick this up there, page 69, please. This is H92 rain screen cladding. We looked at this earlier in your evidence at 310, CWCT standard for systemized building envelopes. You see that there. And then Part 6, fire performance. So that was the compliance standard there. And if you look on to the next page, you can well, you don't see it there, but you do also see this reference elsewhere in H92. My point is it's not in the H40 section on glass fibre, and therefore will you accept that given that it's in H92, the reference in Claire Williams's email to the compliance standard CWCT, which isn't in H40 where you find the GRCA publications, is to be taken as a reference to the whole of the building envelope and not just the part of the building envelope around the lower 4 floors.
Well, I don't accept it because I don't think it's clear, but I read it as the GRC.
And then if you look at page 4...
Mr. Lawrence, it looks as though what Ms. Williams has done is to take some language from the general cladding section and some language from the lower section and splice them together, but without perhaps explaining why she's just put them together in that way.
Yes, and if you look at, to be fair to you, there are references to CWT standards in other parts of the NBS spec which don't deal with the upper floors. For example, curtain walling, and I just wanted to be fair to you, to show you page 47, which is H11. If we could just have that up, please. And that's curtain walling, and you can see there under 325, the deflection under wind load. But in fact, actually, it's at the top of the page as well. If you go to the top of the page, which has disappeared now, design performance requirements 305, CWCT standard for systemized building envelopes, and you've got them all set out again. So that obviously does apply to the curtain walling, which is the lower part of the building. And then the bottom of the same page, please. Deflection under wind load. You see the reference again there, CWCT standards. But just to be clear, for you, the CWCT appears not in the part dealing with the glass reinforced concrete, does appear in H92 dealing with the whole of the envelope. But also does appear in that part dealing with curtain walling. So it appears in various different parts. And having shown you all of that, my question is really, this is what Claire Williams was sending you, what the chairman has really essentially put to you, which is that these standards have been selected from different parts of the NBS and put together in an email, so that they're not only related to the lower 4 floors, but the whole of the building.
Well, that's not how I understood it.
Right.
I think Claire's probably best placed to explain what she was meaning by the email, but that's not how I took it. I did focus on the GRC part of it.
All right. I just wonder why you focused only on the GRCA part of it when the reference to compliance standard CWCT is found elsewhere in the NBS spec, including that H92 rain screen cladding.
I don't think at the time I would have picked up the NBS spec and would have known that glass reinforced concrete was also, I believe, known as cladding, and it says in their guide to concrete cladding. So I think I probably could have reasonably gathered that the fact of the CWCT and it's referencing cladding in there, that it wouldn't necessarily be specific about rain screen and or curtain walling, and wouldn't also apply to the GRC. I would have GRC is a bit that stands out to me on that email.
Okay.
So,
well, let me just see if I can keep going on this for just a moment longer. Can you go back to page 60, or go to page 68? We looked at this, I think, on Thursday in your evidence. Page 68, please, of the SEA 169 document, the NBS spec, and this is 220 specification. And here it says, compliance standards, the Centre for Window and Cladding Technology, CWCT, standard for systemized building envelopes. That is an exact cut and paste into Claire Williams's email, and this is about H92 rain screen cladding. So I'm putting it to you that actually what she was after was fire retardance of the new cladding up and down the building, lower floors and all floors, upper floors too.
well, I agree now, showing me that there is copy and paste from the specification. Yes, I do agree with that. I don't agree that the email is clear, but regardless whether the email is... No, not regardless. I picked out the GRC part of it. That's the bit that stands out to me as being specific.
And I wonder why you did pick that out at the time, as you now say.
Because nothing else highlights that it's specific. Otherwise, we could be talking about windows as well, couldn't we? There's a specific reference to a product there, which is the GRC. And there had been discussions around the robustness of the lower sections of the building.
Well, you say that, I'm just asking you why you didn't pick out the first item on the list, compliance standard CWCT, which appears...
Because the GRC bit stands out to me more, and the fact that it also is glass fibre reinforced concrete cladding.
Now,
Without me putting those, finding those exact lines in an NBS specification, I don't think it's clear. And quite frankly, I wouldn't have answered that myself anyway. I wouldn't have been able to answer that myself anyway. I would have passed that to the design team for them to confirm the fire retardants.
yes. You see, Mr. Lawrence, my problem standing here when asking you about this recollection, which doesn't appear in any documents, is really to go on what I've got in front of me on the screen. But you say what you say. Just going to the question then, she wants clarification on the fire retardance of the new cladding. She's not limiting her request to the lower 4 floors of the building, is she?
No, but I think we're rightly so pulling apart an email word by word and trying to understand and assume what is meant by that. When I received that email, rightly or wrongly, I focused on the GRC part of that email. And there was also discussions going on in the background regarding the robustness of the low floors. So that's how I interpret it. Whether we pull it apart word by word, I'm not saying you're wrong, Mr. Medic, but I'm just telling you how I read that email, rightly or wrongly, how I read that email.
In the context of the question which refers to the Lacanal moment, what was it about Lacanal that was limited only to the lower 4 floors?
I don't know enough about Lacanal. Lacanal suggests to me just fire. It's just another way of emphasising fire.
Yes.
I don't know enough about Lacanal House to be able to comment on what happened and whether it was a lower floors, top floors or anything. I don't know enough about it.
Mr. Lawrence, forgive me for this question, and I'll move on from it, but I feel I do need to ask it. But sitting here now, are you sure that the answers you've been giving me based on this email are not an ex post facto, after the event, rationalisation on your part? Can I then turn to cavity barriers? I'd like to go back, if I may, please, to the BBA certificate for Raynaud Bond PE55, which we looked at earlier. That's SEA 50516. You've already told us that I think you didn't read this document, at least beyond the first page. So forgive me for the next question. Can you go to page 5, please, and look at paragraph 6.6? Cavity barriers should be incorporated behind the cladding as required by the national building regulations, but should not block essential ventilation pathways. Particular attention to be paid to preventing the spread of fire from within a building, breaching the cladding system through window and door openings. Now, you've already told us your understanding of cavity barriers when we were looking at the BCA guidance document. It seems like a very long time ago now, but can we look at approved document B at CLG 50224 at page 82? And when it comes, here is diagram 33. Underneath paragraph 9.1, you told us earlier on that you weren't familiar with diagram 33. Just confirm that. Is that right?
Correct. I've read it post.
Yeah. Let's just look at 9.1 and see if you're familiar at least with the principles in it. Concealed spaces or cavities in the construction of a building provide a ready route for smoke and flame spread. This is particularly so in the case of voids in, above and below the construction of a building, for example, walls, floors, ceilings and roofs. As any spread is concealed, it presents a greater danger than would a more obvious weakness in the fabric of the building. Can I take it from earlier answers in your evidence that you weren't familiar at the time with the precise words of this text?
Correct.
Were you familiar with the principles, at least, as expressed in it?
The principles of compartmentation, Yes.
Yes. Were you aware at the time of your involvement in this project that cavity barriers play an important role in preventing the spread of fire and smoke throughout or across a building?
Yes.
Can I ask you to look at paragraph 9.3 over the page? Junctions and cavity closures. Cavity barriers should be provided to close the edges of cavities, including around openings. Then it goes on, cavity barriers should also be provided, A, at the junction between an external cavity wall, except where the cavity wall complies with diagram 34, and every compartment floor and compartment wall. At the time of your involvement in this project, if not familiar with the precise text, were you familiar with this principle?
I was familiar with, when it comes to range screen cladding, that previously that we would put cavity barriers in line with the compartment walls and floors of each individual property.
Were you aware at the time of your involvement that an example of an opening would be a window?
I wasn't aware at the time, no.
Right. Now, given that you accept, I think, Rydon was responsible for ensuring that the as-built design for Grenfell Tower had to meet statutory requirements, I think you accept that.
Yes.
And I think, as you also accept, your personal role was to coordinate and manage the process of design, though not the design itself.
Yes.
And also to make sure the designs comply with client requirements. Yes?
Yes.
Given those things, my question is, what system or strategy did you yourself use on this project to make sure that cavity barriers were included as required on this building?
I used a specialist subcontractor, used a lead designer, and we used a consultation with the building control.
Now let's look then, in the light of that, at a document, HAR 17738. This is an email from Kevin Lamb of the 3rd of March 2015 to you, copied to Neil Crawford at Studio E and Bruce Soanes and others at Harley. Please find attached drawings now showing the fire breaks, both horizontal and vertical. We assume a requirement of 90 minutes integrity and 30 minutes insulation is sufficient. If not, please advise. Were you surprised to be asked this question by your specialist cladding subcontractor?
I think they were just seeking clarification, so I wasn't particularly surprised. But as with the other requests for information, it would obviously be directed to me, or has been directed to me, but I would be expecting Studio E to be commenting on that.
Right. In the light of our discussions yesterday, where you were copied in on discussions between Harley and Studio E, but didn't expect to have any input into them, is that the reason why you didn't ask Mr. Lamb why he was asking you and not Studio E?
Correct.
Yes. Did it occur to you at this point, when you saw that Mr. Lamb himself, who was providing Harley with services, needed direction here, that you needed to employ some external specialist fire advice?
No, I think he's stating what he believes is correct, and he's asking for further verification of that.
Right.
So,
did it not occur to you to wonder why he needed advice?
no, I don't think it's unusual for a specialist or any other designer to want other parties, whether that be building control, whether that be Studio E, whether it be whoever, to double check their design, that their assumptions are correct. And I think in particular with building control or the building regulations, from my understanding, is that they can be interpreted sometimes in different ways.
Well, you see, here is your specialist subcontractor on whom you say Rydon was completely reliant.
Yes.
batting back to you, or at least Studio E and you, a request for advice about whether their assumption about a 90-minute integrity and 30-minute insulation was sufficient. Did that not cause you some alarm?
No, I saw that as a normal design process and discussions.
Did you look at the drawings which Mr. Lamb attached to his email?
I don't know if I did at the time.
If you hadn't done it, how would you be able to do your job as you say in your statement, checking that the designs complied with client requirements?
I would expect to rely on Studio E to be checking the design from a technical perspective and be advising me.
Let's see if we can trigger a recollection. Can I ask you to look at one of the drawings you were sent? HAR 403952, please. And if you look at the top of this drawing, in the middle, we can see just within the shaded area, it says fire break, and there's a long set of horizontal dashed lines across the page. Do you see that?
Yep.
That's it says fire break. What did you understand that to represent?
Cavity barrier.
A cavity barrier. Okay. Look at the top right hand of the drawing. Again, there's a reference to fire break. What did you understand that to be?
The same.
Right.
I think they're correct or incorrect. I think they're words that often get exchanged.
Right.
In construction.
I mean, looking at these drawings, do these drawings trigger a recollection in your mind that you saw them at the time, do you think?
I've seen these drawings, so...
Right. Okay. Bottom left-hand corner of the drawing is another reference to fire break. Again, is that a cavity barrier?
Yes, I would assume so, yeah.
So when we see the word on this drawing, fire break, was it your understanding, either specifically on this drawing or generally, that fire break meant cavity barrier?
Yes, those are the terms that had been used, I'd seen used previously in previous projects, so yes.
I see. So you think the word fire break is an industry term, is it?
I think it's an interchangeable term with cavity barrier.
You see, the word fire break is not a word that's used in approved document B. Did you know that?
No.
Right. In fact, it's not a technical expression for a cavity barrier at all. Did you know that?
Not recognised expression. No, I didn't know that. I think that's a word that's commonly used in construction.
Right. And for clarity, would you accept that the word cavity barrier should have been used as opposed to fire break?
Yes, if that's, yeah.
Right. Now, do you agree that there are, on this drawing, no cavity barriers at all shown around the window jamb or the window sill openings?
They don't appear to be correct.
And we can see the floor line marked with FFL. You can see that.
Yep.
And we can see that the horizontal cavity barriers appear above this line. Given what I've just shown you in approved document B, paragraph 9.3, do you agree that the horizontal cavity barriers should have appeared in line with the floor?
Sorry, why are they not in line with the floor?
Well, they don't appear to be in line with the floor.
But the floor will be... well, I don't know what the floor is. 150 mil, 200 mil, 300 mil thick?
Right.
And the line's only a line. So I don't think you can determine from that it's definitely not in line with the floor.
Right. Now, yeah, okay, all right. Now, do you accept that the word fire break there could be confusing? Specifically, could be confused with something called a fire stop?
I'm sure it could be.
Right. Have you come across the word fire break in the industry as interchangeable as between cavity barrier and fire stop?
I have done, and previously at this, my experience previously was with Harleys and their terminology. So to that date, that might have been a learned experience from Chalcots and Ferrier, which both involved Harleys. So,
Now, looking at EXO 401315, we can see the discussion about fire breaks developing through March 2015, and you're involved in this. And really what I want to do is just explore with you over the next few questions how deeply involved you were. This is an email from Neil Crawford passing the issue about 90 minutes integrity and 30 minutes insulation on to Terry Ashton at Exova. Now, you're not copied in on this email, but he sends him a selection of attachments. Hi, Terry, just a quick question related to Grenfell Tower, and then he passes on the query. Do you see that?
yes.
And he specifically he asks in the second line, can you comment on the level of protection, 90 plus 30, as to whether this is suitable? Had you asked Mr. Crawford to seek Mr. Ashton's advice, do you remember?
I don't believe so.
So, so far as you're concerned, sitting here, you think that he did it off his own bat?
Yes.
Yeah. Moving forward, we can see Mr. Crawford's response to Kevin Lamb, EXO 401461. And this time, Neil Crawford copies you in to the email he sends him, and also Bruce Soanes and others at Harley. Hi, Kevin. As per our telephone conversation, I've asked the question of Exova on the fire break, but not had anything back. To me, the fire breaks would have to follow the ratings of the party walls, which are shown on the fire plan attached. You can see some of the low-level apartments are separated by 120 minutes and others by 60 minutes. Now, you can see that from this email that you had discovered that Mr. Crawford had asked Exova for advice. Did it surprise you that he had gone out to Exova for advice on something like this?
I think at the time, yes.
It did. Did you?
I without knowing the other conversation with Exova were brought in, I don't know the timeline on that. So
Right. Given that you say that it did surprise you at the time that Mr. Crawford had gone out to Exova on something like this, did you seek to have a conversation with Neil Crawford or indeed Bruce Soanes about why they felt they needed this external advice?
I don't believe a specific conversation about that, no.
No. Is there a reason why you didn't pick it up with him and say, well, hang on, why do you need to go to Exova for something like this?
No, I don't know. I mean, ultimately, building control would be who we'd be relying on.
Do you know whether Mr. Ashton ever actually replied to this query?
I don't know.
Right. He says, as I've read this to you, to me, the fire breaks would have to follow the ratings of the party walls. Were you happy to rely on the opinion of Mr. Crawford in circumstances where he had felt it necessary to go out to Terry Ashton to ask him the answer?
Well, I knew that ultimately building control would be consulted about it. So I knew there would be a check from building control about the compliance.
Right, but this is at this stage. My question at this stage is, given that you were surprised, as you've told us, that Mr. Crawford had felt it necessary to seek external specialist fire safety advice from Mr. Ashton, were you happy to rely on his opinion in circumstances where he had felt it necessary to seek external advice and hadn't got it yet?
Well, the design wasn't finished and signed off, so this again is part of a chain of a process of design development as it goes through.
Yes.
So, and I may not have even seen this email at the time it was sent. There may have been, I'm sure there are others attached to this email that I may have picked up later on. I would not necessarily seen it minute by minute as it came in. So
Yeah, my question is a narrow one. He says, to me, the fire breaks would have to follow the ratings of the party walls. If matters had stopped there, would you have been confident in relying on Mr. Crawford's advice or his view as expressed there? in the circumstances I've put to you?
Yes, because I know that it's going to go to building control to have a final overview and sign off that he's correct.
It sounds from that answer that it doesn't really matter what either Studio E or Exova are saying, because building control are there to pick up the pieces at the end if it's all wrong.
I'm not sure they're there to pick up the pieces, but they are definitely there to advise and look at the compliance of the scheme against building regs.
Right.
Yes, they are a check, aren't they?
But there's a risk, isn't there, that you're over-engineering this, because 120 minutes is obviously more than 120 minutes, 60 minutes is more than the 90/30. If building control is satisfied with 90/30 and you've spent money putting in 120/60, waste of money.
Agreed. But if I've got a fixed contract with a subcontractor and they're over-speccing something and they're ultimately paying for it, then
You don't mind.
I don't mind.
Tracing this through further, we have SEA 3013076, which is an email from you, Mr. Lawrence, to Ben Bailey and Ray Bailey at Harley, copied to Neil Crawford and Simon O'Connor. You're forwarding an email in which you had, I think, received in copy from John Hoban on the 1st of April earlier that day, which he had sent to Neil Crawford at Studio E, setting out the building regulations contents in relation to the issue of elements of structure. You confirmed to Harley and copied to Studio E, gents, the building control officer is now in agreement with the fire protection in the cladding being a cavity barrier rather than a fire stop as first thought. So that's where I think it ends from you. Did you have any thoughts at the time about whether the building control officer, having given this advice and being now in agreement with the fire protection, was initially in error?
Sorry, are you saying that whether I thought the building control officer was wrong?
To start with. And there had been a debate through March, and it ended up with the building control officer, as you say, being now in agreement with the fire protection in the cladding being a cavity barrier.
No, I wouldn't expect the building control officer to be wrong.
Right. Now, if we move to RYD 3039964, this is an email to you from Daniel Osgood on the 27th of March 2015. Morning, Danny. I understand you've landed at Grenfell OK this morning and are getting your head round Harley's facade package and the cladding. I've filed all of the information that we have, drawings and material info in the following location, and you give it. I'm sure it'll take a few days or so to get to grips with it, so happy reading. Please pay particular attention to the fire break spec and insulation guide to ensure they install it correctly before any building control inspection. Now, is it fair to say, just looking at that, that your concern here was to make sure that the fire break spec and the insulation guide had been complied with and installed correctly before building control inspected it?
Yes, as we should do, yes.
So in this instance, at the very least, you were not reliant on building control to get the fire break spec right and to advise you on that and the insulation guide or installation. You wanted to make sure that all of those things were correct before building control inspected. Is that a fair reading of this email?
Yes, we should go through as should the subcontractors, go through their quality checks to make sure that what we are offering to building control for inspection is correct to the drawing and correct.
Exactly.
So he is able to inspect and snag accordingly.
Yes. So does this tell us that so far as your subcontractors were concerned, at least in relation to this topic on this email, you weren't relying on building control advice to get it right in the first place. You were relying on your subcontractors to get it right before building control inspected it, so that building control would pass it.
Correct.
Yes. And that is an example, if you like, a paradigm example, in fact, of how you saw building control throughout, really, as a regulator, telling you whether you passed or failed, rather than advising you on whether you would or not.
I think both, actually. I would expect our designers, specialists or otherwise, to get the design correct and compliant in the first place. But I would also expect that there is highly likely to be areas of the building regulations that they need clarifying from building control. So I would expect building control to give us advice and work with us on that, which I believe is their remit. And then I would expect them to check the drawings and specification to say, yes, it is compliant with the building regs.
Yes. Well, in that last answer, I note that you say you would expect building control to give us advice and work with us, which I believe is in their remit. And we explored this a little bit yesterday, but since it's come back again, I need just to ask you a question about that. Was it your opinion and understanding at the time of your involvement that building control were, if not formally, informally, part of your subcontractor team?
No, I wouldn't say they're part of our subcontractor team, but I think their role is to be able to interpret the building. They're in best place. They're government officials in best place to understand the building regulations. Some of which are extremely complicated. I expect design teams, as they do, in my experience, throughout the construction industry, to talk to the people that know the building regs the best, i.e. building control, if they have any queries, and to interpret that. And building control, I don't expect building control to do a design, to give them a blank bit of paper for them to do a design, but I do expect them to collaborate with the design team to ensure that the design and, in the end, the installation is compliant and correct with building control.
And was that your experience on other projects as well as the Grenfell Tower project?
Yes, although I actually found the Grenfell Tower, John Hoban and Paul Hanson, to be very willing and what's the word? Very willing to collaborate and advise when required.
Yes. Now, Mr. Chairman, we're a few minutes away from 4 o'clock. We're really in the middle of a fairly lengthy part of the story about cavity barriers.
Is this a sort of convenient place to stop?
This is as convenient a place as any to stop, and I can take stock and see how much of the rest of this I actually need to go through.
Yes, all right.
But before I ask you to rise, there is one question I'm afraid I feel I have to just revisit this afternoon on a document we looked at earlier. If I can just do that in the minute or two that remains. And it's the Lacknell House, or the Lacknell Moment email. I just feel there's a question I just need to ask you about it. If you go back to it, it's RYD 000023468. And I put a lot of questions to you this afternoon about this document. I just want you just to help me with this. This document, I know, is a well-known document in the disclosure. Did you have any assistance in preparing to give evidence to the inquiry today and in the last few days about what sort of answers you should give in relation to this document?
No.
Sure about that?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions for this afternoon.
Yes, but you have some more questions for Mr. Lawrence tomorrow.
Now, yes, to set Mr. Lawrence's mind at rest, we will certainly finish tomorrow, unless anything which is not reasonably foreseeable, it happens overnight.
No, yes.
From sources outside my team. So we should finish comfortably within tomorrow.
He would probably like me to ask you whether he could hope to finish before lunchtime.
That would be a reasonable question, and I think it would be I think the reasonable answer is hope but not expect.
Oh, well, sorry, Mr. Lawrence, that's the best I think you can get. I'm sorry we've got to ask you to come back again tomorrow, but at least we warned you of the possibility, and I hope you've been able to make suitable arrangements. So we'll break now, resume at 10 o'clock tomorrow, and we'll hope, without any undertaking, that you might get out by lunchtime, but we'll do our best. All right?
Thank you very much.
So thank you very much. If you'd like to, don't talk to anyone about your evidence or anything related to it over the break, and we'll see you tomorrow. If you'd like to give the usher now, that'll be fine. Thank you. Nothing else today, Mr. Millett?
No, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you very much. 10 o'clock tomorrow, please.